My own mom screamed in court. She is mentally sick. I stayed silent. Welcome to my new story.
My own mother looked the judge straight in the eye and said I was mentally incompetent. She said I'd been unstable my whole life. She said I should never be allowed to control my own finances, let alone inherit anything from my grandmother. I sat there in the Milwaukee County Courthouse on March 14th, wearing my grandmother's pearl earrings, and I did not say a single word. The judge, a woman in her mid-60s with silver hair and reading glasses perched on her nose, listened to my mother's attorney finish his opening statement. Then she turned to him with an expression I had seen many times before, in 38 different cases, actually. It was the expression she made when something did not add up. She looked at Bradley Fenwick, my mother's young attorney in his oversized suit, and asked him a simple question. Do you truly have no idea who this woman is? The woman you are calling mentally incompetent? Bradley blinked. He looked at his notes. He looked at me. He looked back at the judge. My mother's face went from confident to confused to pale in about 4 seconds. Let me tell you how I ended up in that courtroom. My name is Nancy Berglund. I am 33 years old and I work as a certified fraud examiner in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. For the past 7 years, I have specialized in one specific type of crime: elder financial abuse. I investigate cases where someone steals money from vulnerable seniors, forged checks, fake powers of attorney, manipulated wills. I have seen every trick in the book, and I have testified as an expert witness in 38 cases. 31 of those cases ended in conviction. 11 of those testimonies happened in Judge Patricia Kowalczyk's courtroom. She once told another attorney on the record that I was one of the most credible expert witnesses she had encountered in 20 years on the bench. My mother did not know any of this. We had not spoken in 19 years. Here's what you need to understand about my mother, Daisy Hollister. When I was 14 years old, my parents divorced. It was not amicable. My father moved to Oregon. My mother remarried within 3 months to a man named Theodore Hollister, who owned 3 laundromats in Racine County, Wisconsin. And my mother decided that her new life had no room for her old daughter. She did not fight for custody. She did not call on my birthday. She sent exactly 1 Christmas card the first year, and nothing after that. I was raised by my grandmother, Dorothy Berglund, in a small house in Eau Claire. Grandma Dorothy was a retired elementary school teacher who had never made more than $42,000 a year in her life. But she was careful. She tracked every penny. She kept receipts in labeled envelopes. She balanced her checkbook every Sunday morning with a cup of coffee that had exactly 2 sugars and a splash of whole milk. That woman could account for every dollar she had spent since 1987. She taught me everything I know. She just did not realize she was training a fraud examiner. Grandma Dorothy passed away 8 months ago. Congestive heart failure. She was 81, and she went peacefully in her sleep in the house where she had lived for 43 years. I was holding her hand. She left me everything. The house, worth about $285,000, her savings account with $167,400, a small life insurance policy. It was not a fortune, but it was hers. She had earned every cent of it by teaching 3rd graders to read for 36 years. 3 weeks after her funeral, I received a letter from an attorney named Bradley Fenwick. My mother was contesting the will. According to the letter, Daisy Hollister claimed that Dorothy Berglund had been suffering from severe mental decline in her final years. She claimed that I had isolated my grandmother from her family. She claimed that I had manipulated a vulnerable elderly woman into leaving me her entire estate. The woman who had not visited her mother in 15 years, who had not called on birthdays or holidays, who had abandoned her own child, that woman was accusing me of elder abuse. I actually laughed when I read it. Then I stopped laughing, because the letter also stated that my mother had documentation. She had evidence that I had a history of mental instability going back to my teenage years. She was petitioning the court to declare me mentally incompetent and appoint a conservator to manage my grandmother's estate. The proposed conservator was, of course, Daisy Hollister herself. I called my boyfriend Cameron that night. Cameron Lindqvist is a high school history teacher with the kind of family that still has Sunday dinners and keeps photo albums in chronological order. His parents have been married for 41 years. He does not understand dysfunction the way I do. He told me I should reach out to my mother. Maybe there had been a misunderstanding. Maybe she felt guilty about the past and this was her way of reconnecting. I love Cameron. I really do. But sometimes he says things that make me wonder if he has ever met an actual human being outside of a Norman Rockwell painting. My mother remembered the exact dollar amount of my grandmother's estate, $167,400. She put that number in a legal document. She still does not know if my birthday is in March or May. Funny how memory works when money is involved. Before we continue, if you are enjoying this story, please subscribe and tell me in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is there. I see every single comment and it truly means the world to me. Thank you so much for your support. Now back to my mother and her little scheme. Within 2 weeks, the situation got worse. My mother was not just contesting the will anymore. She filed a formal petition with the probate court claiming that I was mentally incompetent and should have a conservator appointed immediately. She wanted emergency powers. She wanted access to my grandmother's accounts, frozen until the court made a decision. Her evidence was creative. I will give her that. As my legal guardian at the time, her name had been on all the intake paperwork, which apparently gave her attorney enough to request copies. After she abandoned me, I spent about 8 months talking to a school counselor about depression and adjustment issues. This is a completely normal response when your mother decides you are not worth keeping. The counselor wrote that I was struggling with feelings of abandonment and low self-worth. My mother's attorney presented this as proof of lifelong mental illness. She also produced a signed statement from my stepsister, Merlin Hollister. Merlin is 28 years old, Theodore's daughter from his first marriage. According to her statement, I had always seemed unstable and erratic, and she had serious concerns about my ability to manage financial matters. Merlin was 9 years old the last time she saw me. I have not spoken to her in 19 years. She knows absolutely nothing about me. But here is the thing about legal proceedings. Once someone files a petition like this, it does not matter that it is ridiculous. It does not matter that the evidence is flimsy. The process starts moving, and you have to respond. You have to hire an attorney. You have to appear in court. You have to prove that you are not crazy. And while you are doing that, word gets out. My firm put me on administrative review. My boss, a decent man named Harold, who had hired me straight out of my certification program, called me into his office and explained the situation. He believed me. He knew this was nonsense. But the firm could not have an expert witness whose mental competency was being questioned in another courtroom. It was a liability issue, an insurance issue, a credibility issue. I was not fired, but I was benched. No new cases, no testimonies, no work that mattered. 7 years of building my reputation, and my mother dismantled it with one phone call to a lawyer. Theodore and Daisy were in financial trouble. That part I figured out quickly. Theodore's laundromats were failing. People do not use laundromats the way they used to, not with cheap washers and dryers available at every big box store. He owed $340,000 to creditors. Their house had a second mortgage. Their credit cards were maxed. My grandmother's estate was not about family for them. It was about survival. But I did not know the full scope of what they had done. Not yet. Cameron and I had our first real fight about 2 weeks into this mess. His parents had started asking questions. His mother, a sweet woman who bakes cookies for every school function, had gently inquired whether there was anything Cameron did not know about me, any secrets, any history. He came to my apartment that night and asked me why I would not just take a psychological evaluation to prove I was fine. I told him that was not the point. The point was that I should not have to prove my sanity because my estranged mother wanted money. He said something about smoke and fire, about how it looked bad that I was refusing to cooperate. I asked him to leave. He left. I sat alone in my apartment that night, looking at the photo of my grandmother that I keep on my bookshelf. It was taken at my college graduation. She was 73 years old and beaming like I had just won the Nobel Prize. All I had done was get a bachelor's degree in accounting, but to her, it was everything. She used to say that paper trails do not lie. She said that people can make up stories and twist the truth, but numbers are honest. Numbers tell you exactly what happened if you know how to read them. I decided to read some numbers. I was still listed as a joint holder on my grandmother's bank account. She had added me 2 years before her death, while she was still completely lucid. She said it was for convenience, so I could help her pay bills if she ever got too tired. But I think she knew something might happen. I think she was protecting herself, or protecting me. I pulled the bank statements for the last 2 years of her life. I created a spreadsheet. I tracked every deposit and every withdrawal, and that is when I found the first crack in my mother's story. In the final 11 months of my grandmother's life, there were 7 withdrawals that did not match any of her regular expenses. No utility bills, no grocery stores, no pharmacy charges, just cash withdrawals, ranging from $4,000 to $12,000 each. Total amount, $47,850. Each withdrawal happened within 3 days of a recorded visit from Daisy Hollister. My grandmother had started showing signs of mild cognitive decline about a year before she died. Good days and bad days. She would forget where she put her glasses, then quote poetry from memory an hour later. She was not incompetent, but she was vulnerable, and my mother knew it. The woman who was accusing me of elder abuse had been systematically stealing from her own mother for almost a year. I did not sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and a pot of coffee, and I did what I do for a living. I investigated. The bank withdrawals were just the beginning. My grandmother had been meticulous about keeping records, but in her final year, things had gotten disorganized. I had assumed it was the cognitive decline. Now I wondered if someone had been helping that disorganization along. I drove to Eau Claire the next weekend to go through her house more carefully. Cameron offered to come with me, but things were still tense between us. I told him I needed to do this alone. The house smelled like her. Lavender and old books and that specific kind of clean that only women of her generation achieve. I spent 3 hours going through her filing cabinet, her desk drawers, her closets. I found what I was looking for in a place I should have checked immediately: her safe deposit box at the First National Bank of Eau Claire. She had added me to the box 5 years ago. I had only been there once to help her store some jewelry after a break-in scare in the neighborhood. I'd forgotten about it entirely. The box contained her jewelry, as expected, her wedding ring from my grandfather, a few savings bonds that had matured years ago, her birth certificate and social security card, and a brown leather journal I had never seen before. The journal was dated. The first entry was from 14 months before her death. The last entry was from 6 weeks before she passed. My grandmother had known what was happening to her. She had documented everything. The first entry nearly broke me. It said that Daisy had called for the first time in years, sounding sweet and apologetic. She said she wanted to reconnect. She said she had made mistakes. Dorothy wrote that she did not trust it, but she was old and tired, and maybe people could change. The entries got darker from there. Daisy visited in August. She asked to borrow $2,000 for an emergency. Dorothy gave it to her. Daisy visited in October. She said Theodore was sick and they needed help with medical bills. Dorothy gave her $4,000. Daisy visited in December. She brought Theodore. They asked Dorothy to sign some papers that would make it easier for them to help manage her finances. Dorothy signed the papers. She wrote in her journal that she was having a bad day, that her mind felt foggy, that she was not sure what she had agreed to. 2 weeks later, she had a good day. She looked at the papers she had signed. She realized they were a power of attorney, giving Daisy control over her accounts. She was too ashamed to tell me. That was the part that destroyed me. My grandmother, the strongest woman I had ever known, was too ashamed to admit that her own daughter had tricked her. She wrote that she did not want me to see her as weak. She did not want me to know that she had been fooled, so she documented everything instead. Every visit, every withdrawal, every lie Daisy told. She kept records because that was who she was. Paper trails do not lie. The final entry was addressed to me. It said she was sorry. She said she had tried to tell me several times but could not find the words. She said she knew Daisy would come for the money after she was gone, and she wanted me to have proof. She wanted me to fight. She wrote that she had always known I was stronger than her. She said that was why she knew I would win. I sat on the floor of that bank vault and cried for 20 minutes. The bank manager pretended not to notice, but when I was done crying, I got to work. The power of attorney document was a forgery, not the signature. My grandmother had actually signed it, confused and manipulated, but the notarization was fake. The notary stamp belonged to a man named Ray Gustafson, who had retired from practice in 2019. The document was dated 2024. Someone had used an old stamp on a new document. It was sloppy. It was obvious, and it was a felony. I started digging into Theodore Hollister's background. What I found made my stomach turn. Theodore's first wife had died in 2012. His mother had died in 2017. In both cases, there had been questions about the handling of their estates. In both cases, money had disappeared. No charges were ever filed, but the patterns were there. Daisy had not married a desperate man. She had married a professional. And I was not their first victim. I was just the one who knew how to fight back. I called my attorney, Caroline Jankowski, the next morning. Caroline was 52, a former prosecutor who had switched to civil litigation after burning out on criminal cases. She was sharp and direct and did not waste time on sympathy. I told her everything. The journal, the bank records, the forged notarization, the pattern with Theodore's previous family members. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "This was not just a civil matter anymore. This was federal. Wire fraud, mail fraud, elder financial exploitation. If the pattern held, possibly more." She asked me what I wanted to do. I told her I wanted to destroy them, but I wanted to do it right. I wanted them to walk into that courtroom thinking they had already won. I wanted them to commit to their lies under oath. I wanted the judge to see exactly who they were before I showed her who I was. Caroline smiled. She said she had hoped I would say that. The court date was set for March 14th. That gave me 6 weeks to prepare. I approached this case the way I approach every case. I built a file. I created timelines. I cross-referenced documents. I verified every single fact 3 times, because that is what you do when your career depends on being right. Caroline filed my response to my mother's petition. It was deliberately bland. I denied the allegations. I stated that I was mentally competent. I requested a hearing. That was it. No evidence attached. No counterclaims. Nothing that would tip them off. Bradley Fenwick called Caroline the day after we filed. She said he sounded confused. That is her whole defense? That is all she has? Caroline told him that I looked forward to my day in court. She said I was confident the judge would see the truth. Bradley probably thought I was bluffing. Or stupid. Or both. 2 weeks before the hearing, Bradley scheduled my deposition. This is standard procedure. The opposing attorney gets to ask you questions under oath before the actual trial. It is supposed to help them prepare their case and avoid surprises. I gave him nothing. He asked me about my education. I said I had a bachelor's degree in accounting. He asked me about my job. I said I was an accountant. He asked me about my mental health history. I said I had seen a counselor briefly as a teenager after my parents' divorce. I answered every question in the shortest possible terms. I did not volunteer information. I did not explain. I did not defend myself. My mother was watching the deposition via video link. I could see her face in the corner of the screen, and I watched her expression shift from nervous to confused to pleased over the course of 2 hours. She thought I was broken. She thought I had given up. She had no idea that I was a woman who had cross-examined money launderers and embezzlers and fraudsters for 7 years. She had no idea that I had sat across from people who had stolen millions of dollars and made them admit to every penny. She had no idea that the flat, boring, defeated woman in that deposition was a performance. I have never enjoyed acting, but I have to admit that was a good show. The week before the hearing, something unexpected happened. I received a message through my attorney from Merlin Hollister. My stepsister wanted to meet. Caroline advised against it. She said it could be a trap, a way to get me to say something they could use against me. She said Merlin was on the other side, but I had seen something in the background of that deposition video. When Bradley mentioned Theodore's name, Merlin's jaw had tightened. When Daisy laughed at one of Bradley's jokes, Merlin looked away. There was something there. Fear, maybe. Or resentment. Or both. I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop in Waukesha, halfway between Milwaukee and Eau Claire. Neutral territory. Merlin Hollister was not what I expected. She was thin and tired-looking, with dark circles under her eyes and fingernails bitten down to the quick. She ordered a black coffee and did not touch it. She told me she was sorry about the statement she had signed. She said her father had written it and told her to sign it. She said she did not have a choice. I asked her what she meant by that. She looked at the table for a long time. Then she told me about Theodore's mother. Geraldine Hollister had died in 2017. She had been 79 years old, living in a nursing home in Scranton, Pennsylvania. She had dementia, real dementia, not the mild decline my grandmother had experienced. She could not remember her own name most days. Theodore had power of attorney. He managed her finances. When she died, there was almost nothing left in her estate. Her house had been sold. Her savings had been drained. Theodore said the nursing home costs had eaten everything up. Merlin said she had believed him at the time. She was 21 years old and did not know any better. But a few years later, she started asking questions. The numbers did not add up. The nursing home had not cost that much. The money had gone somewhere else. She confronted her father about it once. Just once. She did not tell me exactly what happened after that conversation, but she touched the inside of her left wrist when she said it, and I understood. Theodore Hollister was not just a desperate man with failing laundromats. He was a predator who had been doing this for years. His own mother, probably his first wife, though Merlin did not know the details there. And now my grandmother. I asked Merlin why she was telling me this. She said she was tired. She said she'd been carrying this for years and she could not do it anymore. She said she knew what was going to happen in that courtroom, and she did not want to go down with them. I told her I could not promise anything, but if she was willing to tell the truth, the whole truth, under oath, I would make sure the prosecutor knew she had cooperated. She agreed. I drove home that night feeling something I had not felt in weeks. Hope. Not just hope that I would win, but hope that there might be some justice in the world after all. Cameron was waiting at my apartment when I got back. He had brought Thai food from the place I like on Silver Spring Drive, the one that makes the Penang curry too spicy, but I order it anyway. He said he had been thinking. He said he was sorry for what he had said about smoke and fire. He said he had let his parents get in his head, and that was not fair to me. I showed him the journal. I showed him the bank records. I showed him the forged notarization and the pattern with Theodore's mother. He read everything in silence. When he finished, he looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. It was not pity. It was not even anger on my behalf. It was respect. He asked me what I needed him to do. I said I needed him to be in that courtroom. I needed him to see who I really was when I was working. He said he would not miss it for anything. The night before the hearing, I drove to Eau Claire one more time. I parked outside the cemetery where my grandmother is buried, but I did not get out of the car. I just sat there in the dark, looking at the snow on the headstones, thinking about everything she had taught me. Paper trails do not lie. People can twist the truth, but numbers are honest. Tomorrow, the numbers were going to speak for themselves. March 14th, Milwaukee County Courthouse, 8:47 in the morning. I arrived early because that is who I am. I wore a navy blazer, not because my mother had posted about choosing one on Instagram, though I did find that amusing when I checked. I wore it because it was professional and unremarkable. I was not there to make a statement. I was there to win. The courtroom was smaller than the ones I usually testified in. Room 412, fourth floor, reserved for probate matters and guardianship hearings. Not a lot of spectators for this kind of case. Cameron sat in the back row with two of my colleagues from the firm who had heard about what was happening and wanted to show support. Caroline sat next to me at the respondents' table, her briefcase full of documents that my mother did not know existed. Daisy arrived at 9:02, fashionably late. She wore the navy blazer from her Instagram post and pearl earrings that I recognized as my grandmother's. She must have taken them during one of her visits. Somehow, that detail made me angrier than everything else combined. Theodore walked behind her, his face set in an expression of practiced concern. He was playing the supportive husband, the man who just wanted what was best for everyone. He nodded solemnly at the judge's bench as he took his seat. Merlin came in last. She did not look at me. She did not look at anyone. She sat at the far end of the bench behind the petitioner's table and stared at her hands. Bradley Fenwick shuffled papers and checked his phone one more time before the judge entered. He still looked like a kid playing dress-up in his father's suit. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. All rise. The Honorable Patricia Kowalczyk presiding. Judge Kowalczyk entered and took her seat. She put on her reading glasses and looked at the case file in front of her. Then she looked up at the petitioner's table. Then she looked at me. I saw the moment of recognition, a slight narrowing of the eyes, a small tilt of the head. She did not say anything, but I knew she knew. Bradley began his opening statement. He spoke for about 12 minutes. He painted a picture of a concerned mother who had been estranged from her daughter due to family conflict, but who had never stopped caring. He described my grandmother as a vulnerable elderly woman who had been isolated and manipulated. He presented my teenage therapy records as evidence of a pattern of mental instability. He never once mentioned what I did for a living. He never researched me beyond the basics. He assumed that an accountant was just an accountant. When he finished, Judge Kowalczyk asked if the petitioner wished to make a personal statement. Daisy stood. She smoothed her blazer. She spoke calmly at first about her concern for me, her worry that my grandmother's final wishes were not being honored properly. Then something shifted. Her voice rose. She pointed directly at me and said that I was mentally sick, incompetent, that I had always been unstable and should never be allowed to control anyone's finances, let alone inherit from the woman I had supposedly manipulated. I did not flinch. I did not react. I kept my hands folded on the table and waited. Judge Kowalczyk watched my mother's outburst without any change in expression. Then she turned to Bradley Fenwick and asked a simple question. "Counselor, do you truly have no idea who this woman is? The woman your client just called mentally incompetent?" Bradley looked confused. He checked his notes. "She is an accountant, Your Honor. She works for a firm in Milwaukee." The judge looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned to Caroline. Caroline stood. She did not give a speech. She simply said that we would like to present evidence that would reframe the court's understanding of this case. Judge Kowalczyk nodded. Caroline opened her briefcase. She handed a copy of the evidence package to the clerk, who handed it to Bradley. She gave another copy to the judge. She began with the bank records. She walked through the timeline of withdrawals, $47,850 over 11 months. 7 withdrawals, each one within 3 days of a documented visit from Daisy Hollister. Bradley's face did not change at first. He was still expecting some kind of trick. Then Caroline presented the power of attorney document. She pointed out the notary stamp. She presented the retirement records of Ray Gustafson, showing that he had surrendered his notary commission in October 2019. The document was dated March 2024. Bradley's face went pale. Caroline presented the journal. She read selected entries aloud. My grandmother's voice from beyond the grave, explaining exactly what had been done to her, the shame she felt, the confusion, the fear. I watched my mother's face as Caroline read. Daisy's expression cycled through confusion, then shock, then something that looked almost like indignation. She was not ashamed of what she had done. She was angry that she had been caught. Theodore's face was harder to read. He sat very still, like a man who has been through this before and knows when the game is over. Caroline finished with the pattern. Theodore's mother, the suspicious financial activity, the money that had disappeared. She noted that the FBI had been notified and was opening an investigation into possible wire fraud and mail fraud charges. When she sat down, the courtroom was silent. Judge Kowalczyk looked at Bradley. She asked if he had anything to say in response. Bradley asked for a brief recess. The judge granted it. I watched Bradley walk over to Daisy. He leaned down and whispered something in her ear. I could not hear what he said, but I could see her reaction. Her face went from angry to confused to pale. He was telling her who I was, what I did for a living, how many times I had testified in this very courtroom. She looked at me then, for the first time in 19 years. My mother really looked at me. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I just looked back at her and waited. When court resumed, Bradley stood and announced that his client wished to withdraw her petition. Judge Kowalczyk shook her head. She said that given the evidence presented, she was not prepared to simply dismiss the matter. She said she was referring the case to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges. She said she was also forwarding the evidence to the FBI field office in Milwaukee for their ongoing investigation. She looked at my mother one more time. Then she looked at me and said the petition was denied, with prejudice. It was over in less than 2 hours. No dramatic confrontation, no screaming, just evidence presented clearly and a judgment delivered quietly. That is how justice actually works. Not with explosions, but with paper trails. Before I finish this story, I want to say something from my heart. If you have stayed with me this far, thank you, truly. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that subscribe button and leave a like. It means everything to me, and it helps me keep sharing these stories with you. Now let me tell you what happened after that day in court. The FBI moved faster than I expected. Special Agent Tina Morales, a woman in her 40s with a handshake like a vice grip, called me 3 days after the hearing. She had reviewed the evidence package. She had pulled Theodore's financial history going back 15 years. She had found patterns I had not even discovered yet. Theodore and Daisy Hollister were arrested on April 2nd. Federal charges: wire fraud, mail fraud, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. The indictment was 18 pages long. The investigation into Theodore's mother's estate was reopened. The forensic accountants found over $200,000 in unexplained transfers in the 3 years before her death. Geraldine Hollister had owned her home outright, had a healthy pension, and had saved carefully her whole life. By the time she died, there was nothing left. Theodore had done this to his own mother, and then he had taught his wife how to do it to mine. Merlin testified for the prosecution. She told them everything she knew about her father's finances, his methods, his temper. In exchange for her cooperation, she received immunity from prosecution. I do not know if that was fair, but I know she was as much his victim as anyone else. The trial lasted 2 weeks. I did not attend most of it. I had already given my testimony, and I had cases of my own to work on, but I was there for the verdict. Daisy Hollister was found guilty on 4 counts. She was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison. She will serve at least 4 before she is eligible for parole. She was ordered to pay full restitution of $47,850, plus interest, plus penalties. Theodore Hollister was found guilty on 7 counts. He received 6.5 years to be served at a federal facility in Minnesota. His laundromats were seized and liquidated. The money went to his creditors and to restitution for his victims. Their house was sold at auction. The country club membership had already been revoked for unpaid dues months before the trial. Every piece of the life they had built on stolen money was dismantled and scattered. I received a letter from my mother about 2 months after her sentencing. I did not open it. I gave it to Caroline, who read it and told me it was 6 pages of excuses and self-pity without a single genuine apology. She asked me if I wanted to respond. I said no. Some paper trails are not worth following. My grandmother's estate was finally settled in July. I kept the house in Eau Claire. I could not bring myself to sell it. Cameron and I go there some weekends when we need quiet. We drink coffee on the porch where she used to sit with her checkbook on Sunday mornings. I kept her journal too. Not as evidence anymore. That part is over. I kept it because it is the last thing she ever wrote. It is her voice preserved on paper, reminding me that even when she was scared and ashamed and confused, she never stopped fighting for me. Cameron proposed in October. He did it at the Olive Garden on Route 9 in Waukesha, where we had our first date 5 years ago. The food is not spectacular, but the breadsticks are unlimited and the memories are good. I said yes. My grandmother would have liked him, I think. She always told me I needed someone steady, someone who would not run when things got hard. My firm reinstated me the week after the court hearing. My boss apologized personally for ever doubting me. My first case back was an 84-year-old woman in Kenosha whose nephew had stolen $89,000 from her retirement account. We got every penny back, and he got 4 years. Some people think revenge is about anger. about hurting the people who hurt you. But that is not what it is, not really. Revenge is about balance. It is about making sure that the people who think they can take whatever they want from whoever they want learn that the world does not work that way. It is about proving that patience and integrity and careful documentation will always beat cruelty and greed. My mother thought I was weak because I was quiet. She thought I was broken because I did not fight back immediately. She thought she could take everything from me because she had gotten away with taking things before. She forgot that I was raised by a woman who kept receipts. Thank you so much for staying with me until the very end. If you want more stories like this one, there is another one waiting on your screen right now. Just click it, and I will see you there.
My father pushed me down the stairs and said, "Get rid of that child." Enjoy my new story.
On September 19th, my father grabbed me by both shoulders at the top of the staircase in our family home on Prospect Avenue in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. My 4-month-old daughter Rosie was in my arms. He shoved me backward because I refused to hand my baby over to my older brother, like she was a piece of furniture someone could borrow and never give back. I caught the railing with one hand. I twisted my whole body around Rosie like a shell, and I slid down 3 steps on my back, the carpet burning straight through my shirt. My wrist bent sideways. My daughter was screaming. And my father, Gordon Chambers, stood at the top of those stairs and yelled down at me that the inheritance belonged to my brother, and I needed to get rid of that child. That's a real sentence from my real life. Some nights I still can't believe it came out of my own father's mouth. My name is Edith. I'm 31 years old. I work as a dental hygienist at a practice on Hamilton Boulevard in Allentown. I pay my own rent, I file my own taxes, and I haven't asked my parents for a single dollar since I was 19. And somehow, in the eyes of my family, I was still never good enough. Growing up in the Chambers house meant learning one rule early. My older brother Keith could do no wrong, and I could do no right, and this wasn't subtle. When Keith turned 16, my parents bought him a brand new Jeep Wrangler. Cherry red, right off the lot, big bow on the hood like a car commercial. When I turned 16, I got Keith's old mountain bike, the one with the bent front wheel that pulled to the left so hard you'd think it was trying to escape the family, too. I rode that crooked bike to my first job at a frozen yogurt shop on Wyandotte Street and told myself it built character. Keith went to Penn State. My parents covered every cent, $61,000 over 4 years. I went to Northampton Community College and took out $31,000 in student loans that I'm still paying off. When I asked my father why the difference, he looked me right in the eye at the Sunday dinner table and said Keith had more potential. Just like that, like he was commenting on the weather. And you know what the worst part is? For a long time, I believed him. That's what being the invisible child does to you. You don't realize you're invisible until somebody finally sees you. That somebody was Troy Weston, my husband. We met at a friend's barbecue in Easton when I was 26. Troy's a diesel mechanic at a trucking depot. Hands like sandpaper, heart like butter. The first time he came to meet my parents, he wore a pressed button-down and brought my mother a bouquet of tulips he'd picked up at the Wawa on Sullivan Trail. My mother, Phyllis, looked at him like he'd tracked engine grease across her immortal soul. My father shook his hand the way you'd shake hands with someone trying to sell you a driveway you already have. In my family, Troy committed 2 unforgivable sins. He wasn't wealthy, and he treated me like I mattered. Both were apparently offensive. We got married at the courthouse in Easton. Small ceremony, 12 people, best day of my life. And last May, our daughter Rosie was born at St. Luke's Hospital. 7 pounds, 4 ounces, full head of dark hair, and a set of lungs that could rattle the windows in the maternity ward. She was perfect. She is perfect. My parents barely acknowledged her existence. Phyllis sent a text that said, "Congrats," with a period at the end. Not even an exclamation point. My father didn't call at all. Keith, who was living in my parents' basement at the time because his wife Janelle had left him 5 months earlier, sent a single thumbs-up emoji. One emoji for my firstborn child. I screenshotted it because honestly, it was almost funny. You know you're low on the family priority list when your birth announcement gets less reaction than a grocery store coupon. But there was one person in the Chambers family who would have cared deeply. My grandmother, Nell Chambers. My father's mother, And if you want to understand everything that happened, the money, the lies, the staircase, the moment that front door opened, you need to understand Nell first. Nell Chambers was the kind of woman who built things with her bare hands and sheer stubbornness. Starting in her 40s, she bought rental properties across the Lehigh Valley, one at a time, fixed them up herself, rented them out. By the time she was 75, she owned 6 units, 3 duplexes spread between Bethlehem, Allentown, and Emmaus. Together, they were worth about $1.9 million. She wasn't flashy about it. She drove the same Buick LeSabre for 11 years and still clipped coupons for dish soap. But the woman had built real, solid wealth, brick by brick, tenant by tenant. 3 years ago, my father moved Nell into Sycamore Ridge Assisted Living. He told the whole family she had advanced dementia, said she couldn't remember names, couldn't manage money, couldn't be trusted on her own anymore. He said it with such calm authority that none of us questioned it. I'm ashamed of that now. I should have visited. I should have picked up the phone and called the facility myself. But I was 28, working full-time, planning a wedding, and I trusted my father. That was my biggest mistake. Gordon became the sole manager of Nell's properties, her bank accounts, her trust, everything. He became the gatekeeper between my grandmother and the outside world, and for 3 years, that's exactly how he wanted it. Then, in the middle of August, my father called a family meeting at the Prospect Avenue house. He said it was about Grandmother Nell's estate. He said it was important, and everyone needed to be there. What he didn't say was that by the end of that conversation, he would ask me to do something so outrageous, so completely unhinged, that I would realize my parents didn't just prefer my brother over me. They were willing to sacrifice my child for him. Before we continue, please hit subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. I read every single one, and it truly means the world to me. Now, back to what happened. August 14th, a humid evening, the kind where the air sticks to your skin before you even get out of the car. Troy and I drove to the Prospect Avenue house after I finished my shift at the dental office. We left Rosie with Troy's mother back in Easton. Something about my father's voice on the phone told me this wasn't going to be a casual family dinner. I wanted my hands free and my head clear. The house smelled like Phyllis's pot roast and Lysol, my mother's 2 signature scents. You could always tell the emotional temperature of the Chambers household by what Phyllis was cooking. Pot roast meant she was performing. She wanted this evening to feel normal, like a family just sitting down to talk. It wasn't. Gordon sat at the head of the dining table with a manila folder in front of him. Phyllis stood by the kitchen counter with her arms crossed like a sentry. And Keith sat in the corner chair, looking like a man who hadn't slept in 6 months, which honestly, he probably hadn't. His hair was greasy. His shirt had a stain on the collar. This was a 35-year-old man who had been reduced to a ghost of himself by his own choices, and he still couldn't see it. My father opened the manila folder and laid it all out. He said Grandmother Nell's trust contained a specific clause. The grandchild, who was the primary caregiver of a minor child, would receive the family home on Prospect Avenue, valued at $380,000, plus 70% of the entire property portfolio. The grandchild without children would get the remaining 30%. Since I had Rosie, I qualified for the house and the bigger share. Keith did not. And then Gordon said the words that changed everything. He told me I had 2 options. Either I could sign temporary custody of Rosie over to Keith, making Keith the qualifying grandchild under the trust, or I could sign a separate document, relinquishing my entire inheritance claim. Either way, Keith would get what he deserved. His word. Deserved. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because my brain literally could not process what I just heard. My father, my own father, was asking me to hand my 4-month-old baby to my brother, a 35-year-old man living in a basement, a man whose wife, Janelle, had walked out 7 months ago because he'd blown through $67,000 on online poker and weekend trips to the Parks Casino in Bensalem, a man whose credit score was 480, and I only knew that because Janelle mentioned it to me the one time we talked after she left. Keith's idea of financial planning was hoping the next hand would pay his electric bill, and now he was supposed to be the primary caregiver of an infant. Phyllis jumped in immediately. She put her hand on my arm, that move she does when she wants you to think she's being gentle, but really she's just pinning you down. And she told me this wasn't about me. She said Keith needed this more. She said I had Troy, I had my job, I had stability. Keith had nothing. And family, she said, takes care of family. I looked at my mother and I thought, you have never once taken care of me. Not when I needed braces at 14 and you said we couldn't afford them, 2 months before you bought Keith a PlayStation. Not when I graduated from hygienist school and you forgot to come because Keith had a flat tire and somehow that was a 2-person emergency. You never once put me first. But now I'm supposed to hand over my child because family takes care of family? Troy, who had been standing in the doorway with his arms folded and his jaw getting tighter by the minute, said exactly 4 words. He told them we were leaving, and we left. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't slam anything. He just put his hand on my back and walked me out the door. That's who Troy is. Steady when I can't be. That should have been the end of it. But the Chambers family does not believe in endings. Starting the next morning, my phone became a weapon. Phyllis texted every single day. Long, guilt-soaked messages about sacrifice and loyalty and how I was tearing the family apart. Gordon left voicemails. Short, cold, controlled. He said I had until September 19th to make the right decision. He said if I didn't cooperate, he would make things very difficult. He didn't explain what that meant. He didn't need to. My phone was going off so much that Troy asked if I was running for office. Between Phyllis's daily guilt novels, Gordon's voicemail threats, and Keith's one sad emoji per night, I had more notifications than a teenager on prom night. Keith started texting me separately too, pathetic, half-begging messages. One said he'd take really good care of Rosie. Another said he just needed the inheritance to get back on his feet, like a baby was a ladder rung, like my daughter was a tool for his recovery. But here's what really started eating at me. I drove past the Prospect Avenue house one afternoon that week, and something caught my eye. My father, a facilities coordinator at a community college in the Lehigh Valley, probably pulling in $62,000 a year, was standing in the driveway next to a brand new Ford F-150 Lariat. That truck runs about $58,000. And through the front window, I noticed the kitchen had new countertops. Looked like quartz. Definitely not the old cracked Formica I grew up eating cereal on. Where was that money coming from? I put that question in a box in the back of my mind. It would matter later, a lot more than I knew. Troy wanted to drive over and confront Gordon himself. I stopped him. Not because I doubted Troy, but because I knew my father. If Troy lost his temper even once, Gordon would call the police, play the victim, file a complaint. My father wasn't stupid. He was calculating. And the only way to beat a calculator is with better math. That week, I pulled together every document with my name on it. Bank statements, insurance papers, our lease, Rosie's birth certificate, my marriage license. I bought a small fireproof lockbox at the Staples on Airport Road for $39.99, and I put copies of everything inside. I wish someone had told me to do that at 20 years old. You don't think you need a paper trail until the day you desperately do. I was ready to cut them all off, change my number, block every Chambers in my phone, and raise my daughter in peace. But then, on August 26th, I got a call from a woman named Patrice Okafor. She was a nurse at Sycamore Ridge Assisted Living, the place where my grandmother Nell had been locked away for 3 years. What Patrice told me made me realize the inheritance fight was only the surface. Underneath it was something much, much darker. Patrice Okafor had been at Sycamore Ridge for about 6 months. She was a registered nurse, spoke in a calm and careful voice, the kind of person who chooses every word before she says it. She told me she'd found my number on an old emergency contact form my grandmother had filled out years ago, before Gordon took over everything. She said she had concerns about my grandmother's care situation, specifically about the restrictions Gordon had placed on her. And then she said something that made me pull my car over to the shoulder of Hamilton Boulevard and just sit there with the engine running. She told me my grandmother did not have advanced dementia. I sat there for maybe 30 seconds, not breathing. 3 years. 3 years my family had told me Nell was gone, that she couldn't remember faces, couldn't follow conversations, couldn't function. And now a nurse was telling me that was a lie. Patrice explained that when she started at Sycamore Ridge in March, the staff briefed her on Nell's file. Dementia patient, confused, prone to paranoid accusations about her family, standard protocol, limit stimulation, restrict visitors per the power of attorney holder's instructions, and redirect when she became agitated. But Patrice couldn't make that file match the woman she actually met, because Nell Chambers was running a Tuesday Scrabble tournament in the common room and winning almost every single week. She'd organized a Thursday book club with 9 regular members. She was halfway through a 700-page biography of Dolly Parton and had opinions about the stock market that were sharper than most financial advisors I've met. She told Patrice that anyone who didn't have at least a small index fund was, in her exact words, leaving money on the sidewalk. Gordon told the whole family his mother couldn't remember her own name. The very first thing Nell told Patrice the day they met was the exact balance of her savings account, down to the cent. This woman was sharper than a brand new pair of kitchen scissors, and my father had the whole world believing she'd lost her mind. Here's how Gordon did it, step by step, like a manual for erasing a person. First, he took Nell's cell phone, told the staff it was overstimulating her. Second, he filed power of attorney paperwork and listed himself as the sole authorized visitor. No one else could see her without his written permission. Third, and this is the part that makes my stomach turn every time I think about it, he told the nursing staff that Nell suffered from paranoid episodes as part of her dementia. So when Nell told the nurses that her son was stealing her money, they didn't investigate. They wrote it down as a symptom. They patted her hand and changed the subject. A woman telling the truth, and nobody believed her because her own son had labeled her crazy. Nell tried to get help. She asked staff members to make phone calls for her. She asked them to send letters, but she didn't have anyone's number memorized, because honestly, who does anymore? Everything had been in the phone Gordon took. She didn't know my new address either because I'd moved after marrying Troy. And when your POA holder has told the facility you're paranoid and delusional, your words stop meaning anything. You become a woman yelling into a soundproof room. For 3 years, Patrice was different because she walked in with fresh eyes. She hadn't been trained on Gordon's version of reality. She saw an 81-year-old woman running book clubs, cracking jokes about the cafeteria meatloaf and organizing game nights. And then she saw the chart that said severe cognitive decline. Those 2 pictures didn't match. And in Pennsylvania, Patrice was what's called a mandated reporter. If she suspected elder abuse or neglect, she was legally required to act. So she dug up that old emergency contact form from a filing cabinet, found my number, and called. 2 days later, on a quiet morning when I knew Gordon would be at work, I drove to Sycamore Ridge. I signed in at the front desk, and Patrice walked me down a quiet hallway to room 14B. My grandmother was sitting in a blue armchair by the window, reading a library copy of a mystery novel with a cracked spine. She looked thinner than I remembered, smaller, but her eyes were the same. Quick and sharp and full of something that 3 years of isolation hadn't managed to put out. She looked up at me, and for a few seconds, neither of us said anything. Then she said my name, clear as a bell. No hesitation, no confusion. Just my name, like I'd visited last week instead of 3 years ago. I'd brought Rosie. I was breastfeeding, so she went wherever I went, strapped to my chest in a carrier. I lifted her out and placed her in Nell's arms, and my grandmother's hands started trembling. Not from weakness, from something much bigger than that. Nobody had told her I'd had a baby. 3 years in that room, and not one person mentioned she had a great-granddaughter. She held Rosie and stared at her face for a long time. Then she looked up at me and said the baby had her nose. And she was sorry about that because it wasn't her best feature. I laughed so hard I nearly woke up the woman napping next door. That was Nell. Even in the middle of all this darkness, she could find something to be funny about. Once she composed herself, Nell got very focused, very still, the kind of stillness I remembered from when I was a little girl and she'd sit at her kitchen table with a calculator and a stack of rent checks, running numbers on her properties. She was in business mode. She told me that her original trust, written by her attorney, Warren Healy, out of his office on 7th Street in downtown Allentown, divided everything equally between me and Keith, 50-50. No conditions, no clauses about children or caregiving, just a clean, fair split because, As she put it, both her grandchildren deserved an equal start in life. But 2 years ago, Gordon fired Warren Healy, didn't give a reason, just told him his services were no longer needed. Then he brought in a man named Glenn Fisk, a lawyer, who, as far as Nell understood, did whatever Gordon asked him to do. Fisk rewrote the trust. He added the clause about the grandchild with a minor child receiving the Prospect Avenue house plus 70% of the portfolio. At the time, Keith was still married to Janelle, and they were supposedly trying to have a baby. Gordon had bet that Keith would have a child first, but then Janelle left Keith in January because of the gambling. And 5 months later, I had Rosie. Gordon's own rigged game backfired on him. The clause he created to help Keith now helped me, and he couldn't undo it without admitting he'd committed fraud. So his only way out was to make me hand over my daughter or give up my share entirely. That explained the desperation. That explained the pressure. My father wasn't just greedy. He was trapped by his own lie. And the money, so that was worse. Nell told me that before Gordon took her phone, she'd already noticed the numbers didn't add up. Her 6 properties generated about $8,400 in combined monthly rent, but the deposits into her accounts were only around $3,200. Every single month, more than $5,000 just vanished. Over 3 years, that came to roughly $187,000. Gone. Into my father's pocket. My father wasn't just playing favorites. He was robbing his own mother blind while she sat in a room with no phone and no visitors, labeled too crazy for anyone to believe. If you have a parent or grandparent in a care facility, go visit them. Not on Christmas, not on their birthday. Go on a random Tuesday morning, sit with them, ask how they really are. Because sometimes the person who's supposed to be protecting them is the one they need protection from. That night, I sat in my car in the Sycamore Ridge parking lot. Rosie was asleep in her car seat. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel, and I made a decision. I wasn't going to run. I wasn't going to change my number and hide. I was going to take my father apart, legally, quietly, and completely, and my 81-year-old grandmother, the woman my father tried to erase from the world. She already had a plan. She'd been sitting in that room for 3 years with nothing but time and fury. And believe me, Nell Chambers had thought this through far better than I ever could have. The first thing Nell told me during my second visit to Sycamore Ridge was that revenge is a dish best served with documentation. She said it with a completely straight face, sitting in that blue armchair, and I realized then that my grandmother hadn't just been sitting in that room for 3 years, feeling sorry for herself. She'd been thinking, cataloging, waiting for someone, anyone, to walk through that door and hand her the one thing she didn't have, a connection to the outside world. Now she had me, and that was all she needed. We had 3 weeks. Gordon had given me a deadline of September 19th, the date of the next family meeting where I was supposed to either sign custody of Rosie over to Keith or surrender my inheritance. Fine. We'd use every single day. The first call I made was to Warren Healy, Nell's original estate attorney. His office was on 7th Street in downtown Allentown, above a sandwich shop that smelled like roast beef and mustard, the kind of building where real work gets done by people who don't need marble floors to prove they're serious. Warren was in his late 60s, silver-haired, reading glasses on a chain. And when I sat across from his desk and explained what Gordon had done, the man's face went through about 6 emotions in 10 seconds. The last one was cold, focused anger. Warren told me he'd been suspicious when Gordon fired him 2 years ago. No explanation, no notice, just a letter saying his services were no longer required. He'd considered reaching out to Nell directly, but was told by Gordon that she had dementia and couldn't communicate, so he let it go. He said he'd regretted that decision every day since, and now he intended to correct it. He pulled Nell's original trust from his files. Everything was right there in black and white, 50-50, split between me and Keith. No conditions about children, no clause about caregiving. Clean and fair, exactly how Nell described it. Then I showed him the documents Gordon had given me at the August 14th meeting, the modified trust prepared by Glenn Fisk. Warren put them side by side and shook his head, like a mechanic looking at someone else's bad wiring job. The modifications were significant. Keith's share had been inflated to 70%, plus the Prospect Avenue house, all contingent on the primary caregiver of a minor child clause that Nell had never approved and never signed. Glenn Fisk had used Gordon's power of attorney to authorize the changes, which was only legal if Nell was truly incapacitated and the changes served her interests. Neither was true. Warren said one word, challengeable. Then he said another word, criminal. Step 2 was the money. This part took me 2 weekends, a laptop, and about 4 pots of coffee. Nell remembered her online banking login, because of course she did, and with Patrice's help accessing a computer at the facility, we pulled 3 years of deposit records. I also went to the Lehigh County Courthouse and pulled property tax records for all 6 rental units, which are public information. Then I cross-referenced the expected rental income against what was actually deposited into Nell's accounts. The gap was staggering. Nell's properties brought in roughly $8,400 per month in combined rent, but only about $3,200 was hitting her accounts. The remaining $5,200 per month was being diverted. I built a spreadsheet, month by month, property by property, and the total over 36 months came to approximately $187,400. That money had been flowing straight into Gordon's personal checking account, and from there, some of it went somewhere I didn't expect. But I'll get to that in a minute. Step 3 was the most important piece, proving Nell was competent, because Gordon's entire defense would be that his mother had dementia and he was acting in her best interests. We needed a doctor to blow that apart. Warren arranged for an independent geriatrician, Dr. Rana Salazar out of Lehigh Valley Hospital, to visit Nell at Sycamore Ridge. She conducted a full cognitive assessment, the Montreal Cognitive Assessment, a clock drawing test, memory recall exercises, the works. Nell scored in the normal range for her age group, mild, age-appropriate memory lapses, the kind where you walk into a room and forget why, which honestly I do at 31, so that's just being human. Dr. Salazar's written report stated in clear clinical language that Nell Chambers was fully competent to manage her own affairs and make her own decisions. The doctor also noted in a separate addendum that the conditions of Nell's isolation, no phone, restricted visitors, sole POA controlled by a family member, raised serious red flags consistent with elder abuse. That report was a grenade with the pin already pulled. We just needed to decide when to throw it. By the second week of September, Warren had assembled the full package: the original trust, the fraudulent modifications, the financial discrepancy spreadsheet, Dr. Salazar's cognitive assessment, a formal complaint to the Lehigh County District Attorney's Office for financial exploitation of an elderly adult under Pennsylvania Act 13, a petition to revoke Gordon's power of attorney, and a motion to restore the original trust terms. Everything was filed on September 15th, 4 days before the meeting. And here's the part that still gives me a strange, grim kind of satisfaction. On September 15th, when Warren walked that complaint into the DA's office, when those bank records hit a prosecutor's desk, when Nell's cognitive assessment was entered into the official record, my father was at home watching a baseball game. He had no idea. The walls of his life were already falling, and he was sitting in his recliner thinking he'd won. Pretending I was still considering his offer during those 3 weeks was the hardest performance of my life. I called Gordon on September 10th, let my voice tremble a little, and told him I was thinking about it, that I needed more time, but I understood his position. He was magnanimous on the phone, the way powerful people get when they think you're about to surrender. He told me to take a few more days. He told me he knew I'd do the right thing. I deserve an Oscar for that phone call, or at the very least, a gift card to Target. Troy and I prepared for September 19th together. It was his idea to have Nell and Warren nearby as a safety plan. He didn't trust Gordon, never had, and he wanted witnesses close. Nell and Warren would park on the next block in Warren's car. If anything went wrong, Troy would text one word and they'd come in. Patrice Okafor agreed to accompany Nell as her medical attendant. 3 people, 1 block away, ready if needed. Some people might think that was overkill. But Troy grew up in a house where his father punched holes in drywall when dinner was late. He recognized danger the way some people recognize weather, in the pressure change before the storm hits, and he wasn't about to let me walk into that house without a backup plan. My savings account at that time had about $9,200 in it. Not a fortune, but enough to give me options. I'd been putting away $150 every paycheck since I was 24, even when it was tight, especially when it was tight. That little cushion meant I didn't have to say yes to anything out of desperation. If this story teaches you one thing, let it be that. A small savings account won't change your life overnight, but it might keep someone else from controlling it. The night before September 19th, I stood in Rosie's nursery at 2 a.m, watching her sleep. She was wearing a onesie with little strawberries on it. Her hands were curled into tiny fists, the way babies do, like she was ready to fight the world and she hadn't even opened her eyes yet. I whispered to her that tomorrow was going to be a hard day, but that everything I was doing was for her. Then I went to bed, set my alarm for 6, and didn't sleep a single minute. September 19th, a Friday, 6 p.m. The sky over Bethlehem was that bruised purple you get in early fall, the kind that makes everything look like a painting and nothing feel real. Troy drove. I sat in the passenger seat with Rosie in her car seat behind me. I was breastfeeding, so she went where I went. That was simply the math of new motherhood. Troy had suggested leaving her with his mother, but Rosie had been cluster feeding all week and wouldn't take a bottle. And honestly, part of me, the part I'm not proud of, still believed my parents might see their granddaughter and feel something human. That was the last grain of naive hope I had left. It wouldn't survive the night. We pulled onto Prospect Avenue at 5:50. The house looked the same as it always had. Beige vinyl siding, brown shutters. The hedges Phyllis kept trimmed to military precision. Gordon's new Ford F-150 sat in the driveway like a trophy. Troy parked at the curb and sent a text to Warren Healy. "We're here." Warren confirmed he, Nell, and Patrice were parked on Birch Street 1 block north, engine running. Inside, the house smelled like coffee and lemon cleaner. No pot roast this time. Phyllis wasn't performing anymore. She sat at the dining table with her hands folded, eyes down, the posture of a woman who knew exactly what was about to be asked and had already made peace with it. Gordon stood at the head of the table, manila folder open. Same folder from August 14th, but thicker now. More papers, more signatures, more lines for me to sign away my daughter or my inheritance. He'd printed custody transfer forms. I could see the Lehigh County Family Court header from across the room. Keith sat in the corner. He looked worse than last time, thinner. His knee was bouncing under the table so hard the coffee cups were trembling. He wouldn't look at me. You know that feeling when you look at someone and realize they're not angry at you, they're not scheming against you, they're just drowning, and they'll grab onto anything that floats, even if it means pulling you under? That's what Keith looked like, and I felt sorry for him for exactly 3 seconds, until I remembered what he was willing to let happen to my daughter for a check. Gordon didn't waste time. He tapped the folder and told me this was my last chance. He said he'd been patient. He said he'd been more than fair. He said all I had to do was sign, either the custody papers or the relinquishment form, and we could all move forward as a family. I looked at my father across that table and I felt something I'd never felt before. Not anger, not fear, just a deep, heavy clarity. Like someone had wiped the fog off a window I'd been staring through for 31 years. I told him no, not dramatically, not with a speech, just no. And then I picked up Rosie's car seat from the floor and started walking toward the hallway. What happened next took maybe 7 seconds. It felt like 40 minutes. Gordon moved fast for a 59-year-old man. He stepped into the hallway and blocked my path near the top of the staircase. He wasn't yelling yet. That came after. First, he tried the voice, the low, controlled, Gordon knows best voice that had run this family for decades. He told me I was making a mistake. He told me I didn't understand what was at stake. I tried to step around him. He grabbed my shoulders, both hands, hard. I had Rosie's car seat in my left hand. I tried to twist free with my right, but Gordon wasn't letting go. He was gripping me like I was something he owned, like he'd been gripping this whole family his whole life and couldn't physically process someone pulling away. Then he shoved. I went backward. My heel caught the top step. My right hand shot out and grabbed the railing, and I twisted my body. Pure instinct, pure motherhood. so that my back hit the stairs and Rosie's car seat stayed level against my chest. I slid down 3 steps. The carpet tore through my shirt and burned the skin off my lower back. My wrist bent sideways against the railing with a hot snap of pain that told me something had gone very wrong in there. Rosie was screaming, that newborn scream that sounds like the whole world is ending, because for her, in that moment, it was. And from the top of the stairs, my father looked down at me and screamed that the inheritance was Keith's and that I needed to get rid of that child. Phyllis stood in the dining room doorway. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She just stood there with her hand over her mouth, watching her husband shove her daughter down a staircase, and she did nothing. 31 years of nothing, perfectly consistent to the end. Troy came around the corner from the living room like a freight train. He put himself between me and the staircase, helped me up with one arm, checked Rosie with the other. She was crying but unharmed. The car seat had done its job, and my body had done the rest. My back was on fire, my right wrist was swelling fast. But my daughter was safe. That was the only calculation that mattered. Troy pulled out his phone. He typed one word and sent it to Warren Healy's number. Then he looked at Gordon, still standing at the top of the stairs, breathing hard, face red, and told him he was calling 911. Gordon's expression flickered. Just for a second, the first crack. The front door opened 90 seconds later. Warren Healy came in first, gray suit, briefcase, reading glasses still on. Behind him, Patrice Okafor in her scrubs. And behind Patrice, moving slowly with a wooden cane and an expression I will remember until the day I die, my grandmother. Nell Chambers, 81 years old, the woman my father had locked away for 3 years and told the world was gone. She was right there, standing in his hallway, looking up at him. Gordon's face went white, not the white of anger or shock, the white of a man watching the ground open up beneath his feet and realizing there was no bottom. His hands started shaking. His mouth opened and nothing came out. For the first time in my entire life, my father had no words, no control, no script. Keith dropped the coffee cup he'd been holding. It shattered on the dining room floor, and nobody picked it up. Phyllis sat down in the nearest chair like her legs had simply stopped working. Nell didn't yell. She didn't make a speech. She walked into the dining room, pulled out a chair, and sat down at the table like she owned the place, which, technically, she still did. Warren set his briefcase on the table, opened it, and placed a single folder in front of Gordon. Inside that folder was everything. Dr. Salazar's cognitive assessment proving Nell was competent. 36 months of bank records showing the missing $187,000, the original trust beside the fraudulent modification, and a stamped copy of the complaint filed with the Lehigh County District Attorney 4 days earlier. Gordon stared at those documents. I watched his eyes move across the pages, the numbers, the dates, the DA's office letterhead, and I watched him understand. He hadn't lost tonight. He'd lost 4 days ago. Everything since then had been a dead man walking and not knowing it. I'd never seen a person age 10 years in 10 seconds. Gordon went from barking orders to looking like someone just told him he owed the IRS his entire retirement fund. His hands kept shaking. He tried to speak twice, and both times nothing came out but air. Nell looked at her son across that table, and she said, quiet, steady, the voice of a woman who had 3 years to rehearse this moment. Gordon, I raised you, and I have never been more ashamed of anything in my life. That was it. No screaming, no dramatic monologue, just a mother telling her son the truth in 7 words. And somehow, that was worse than anything else she could have said. Troy called 911 at 6:22. 2 officers from Bethlehem PD arrived at 6:39. They documented my injuries, the carpet burns on my back, the swelling in my right wrist. Troy gave his statement. Gordon told them I'd slipped on the stairs. The officers noted both accounts, took photos, and filed a report. They didn't arrest him on the spot, which is frustratingly normal for domestic incidents with conflicting stories in Pennsylvania. They told me I could pursue charges through the DA's office. I already had. We left the Prospect Avenue house at 7:45 that evening. Troy carried Rosie. Warren drove Nell back to Sycamore Ridge. Patrice went with them. Gordon stood in the kitchen alone. Phyllis had gone upstairs without a word. Keith was on the back porch, sitting on the steps in the dark. Nobody said goodbye to any of them. There was nothing left to say. If you've made it this far, you're the reason I keep telling these stories. If you haven't subscribed yet, I'd love for you to join us. Hit that button and know that it genuinely makes my day every single time. Thank you. Now let me tell you how it ended. 4 days after September 19th, on a Tuesday morning at 7:15, 2 detectives from the Lehigh County DA's office pulled into the driveway of the Prospect Avenue house. Gordon was still in his bathrobe. He'd probably been sleeping badly, or not at all, since Thursday night. They had a warrant for his arrest. The charges: financial exploitation of an older adult under Pennsylvania Act 13, a first-degree felony because the stolen amount exceeded $100,000, theft by deception, also a felony, simple assault, reckless endangerment, and endangering the welfare of a child. Because Rosie was in my arms when he shoved me, they put handcuffs on my father in his own driveway, at the house his mother had paid for, on the street where he'd spent 30 years pretending to be a respectable man. No cameras, no audience, no dramatic scene, just 2 officers, a pair of handcuffs, and the quiet click of a man's entire life locking shut. His bail was set at $75,000. He couldn't pay it. The money in his accounts was stolen money, and those accounts were frozen. Gordon Chambers spent 11 days in the Lehigh County Correctional Facility before Phyllis scraped together a bond using her own savings. 11 nights on a thin mattress for a man who'd just renovated his kitchen with his mother's money. There's a word for that kind of math. I think it's called justice. But Gordon wasn't the only one. 2 weeks later, when forensic accountants finished tracing the money, they found something that hit me harder than the staircase. Phyllis had a separate savings account at a small bank in Easton, not the family's main bank, a different one, under her maiden name. Over 3 years, Gordon had transferred roughly $34,000 into that account. Regular deposits 3 or 4 times a month, small enough to avoid automatic flags. My mother knew. She didn't just look the other way. She profited. Every guilt trip she'd laid on me, every speech about family sacrifice, every time she stood in that kitchen with her arms crossed and told me I was being selfish. She had stolen money in her pocket. Phyllis was arrested on a Wednesday afternoon in early October. Conspiracy to commit theft by deception, receiving stolen property, a felony in Pennsylvania when the amount exceeds $2,000. I don't know what she told the officers when they came. I imagine she was polite. Phyllis was always polite. Right up until the moment she watched her husband shove me down a staircase and did absolutely nothing. She took a plea deal, 18 months of probation, 200 hours of community service, full restitution of the $34,000. She avoided prison time because she cooperated with the DA and gave testimony against Gordon. But for a woman who spent her entire life building the perfect family portrait for the neighbors and the church circle and the PTA, a criminal record was its own kind of cell, one she'd carry everywhere. Gordon's attorney tried to negotiate. The evidence didn't leave much room. Bank records don't lie, and Warren Healy's documentation was meticulous. Gordon took a plea, 3 to 6 years in state prison, full restitution of $187,400, which he didn't have and probably never would. He also lost his job. A community college can't employ a man with felony convictions for elder abuse and assault. 30 years of mediocre respectability, gone in one sentencing hearing. Glenn Fisk, the attorney who'd modified Nell's trust under Gordon's direction, he didn't go to prison, but the Pennsylvania Disciplinary Board opened proceedings against him within weeks. He'd altered legal documents, using a power of attorney that was obtained under fraudulent pretenses, without the grantor's informed consent. His license was suspended, and disbarment followed within 6 months. A separate investigation for forgery was still open last I heard. Some consequences are slow, but they still find you. And Keith, my brother, didn't face criminal charges. He hadn't stolen anything, hadn't forged anything, hadn't pushed anyone. But Nell sat him down privately, just the two of them, and told him the truth about his share of the estate. The money was there for him. every penny of his 50%, but he wouldn't see a single dollar until he completed a 90-day residential addiction treatment program. If he dropped out or relapsed before completion, his share would be redirected to a charitable trust. For the first time in Keith's life, nobody was going to fix it for him. No parents swooping in with a check. No sister guilted into sacrifice. Just Keith, a program, and the choice to either grow up at 35 or lose everything for real. I don't know yet which way that story goes. That's his to write. Nell took back full control of her estate, her properties, and her life. She moved out of Sycamore Ridge and into a nicer facility she chose herself, one in Emmaus, closer to me, where she picked her own room, had her own phone, and hosted Scrabble night every Tuesday without anyone's permission. She sees Rosie every Sunday morning. The first thing Nell did after getting her phone back was download a podcast app. 3 years without the internet, and the woman came out wanting true crime and gardening tips. She's 81 and she has a better media diet than I do. Warren Healy restored the original trust, 50-50. No gimmicks, no clauses, no conditions, except for Keith's treatment requirement, which Nell added herself and had every legal right to include. The Prospect Avenue house went up for sale. Neither of us wanted to live there. Some houses hold too many ghosts, and I'm not talking about the spooky kind. Troy and I used my share of the proceeds as a down payment on a house in Palmer Township, a 3-bedroom with a backyard and a garage where Troy immediately set up a workbench. The first morning in that house, I made scrambled eggs in our own kitchen, on our own stove, at our own counter. I stood there with a spatula in one hand and my daughter on my hip, and I cried. Not the sad kind, the kind you earn. Troy walked in, looked at me, and asked if I burned the eggs. I hadn't, but that's Troy. The man watched a family implode 3 weeks ago, and his first concern is always whether breakfast is going to set off the smoke alarm. Troy was right all along, by the way. Every time he told me my family didn't deserve my energy, every time he said I was worth more than the scraps they threw me, I just needed 3 decades and 1 staircase to finally hear him. Troy and I keep a jar on the kitchen counter now. Every Friday night, we each write down one good thing that happened that week and drop it in. On New Year's Eve, we'll read them all. Most of them will be small. Rosie's first laugh, a really good parking spot, a perfect cup of coffee on a cold morning. But that's the whole point. The small things are the big things. They always were. Sometimes the daughter they overlook is the one who saves the whole family. That's all for today. And I'm so grateful you stayed with me through this whole story. There's another one waiting for you right there on your screen. And I have a feeling you're going to love it just as much. I'll see you there.